I'm here today to take a look at the ASRock Z690 Taichi, which is actually surprisingly hard to get your hands on, at least at the point that I'm shooting this video, which is about a week after Alder Lake launched, give or take. It's a LGA 1700 motherboard for your 12th gen Intel CPUs, in case you didn't know that. Let's take a deep dive, because there's a lot we need to talk about with this board. We need to talk. Full disclosure, ASRock sent me this board because I requested it, but I wasn't able to locate it at my local micro center. I also couldn't buy it on Amazon or Newegg. So there's some kind of critical supply chain problem right now that's causing problems for availability. And when I first saw it, I was a little worried. Saw that rear I/O. Rear I/O is the first thing that you really notice on a lot of motherboards. And if you look at the rear I/O here, we've got our BIOS flashback button and our Wi-Fi 6E solution. This is a new thing, even beyond Wi-Fi, 802.11 AC. And then we've got our HDMI out. Those are for our CPUs that have an integrated GPU. And then we've got the Lightning Gaming USB 5 gigabit ports. We'll come back to those. A 7.1 audio solution. We'll come back to that. We got dual Ethernet, one 1 gig, one 2.5 gig. And then we've got 10 gigabit Type A and 40 gigabit Thunderbolt 4 Type C. And then we've got two more USB 3.2 ports. Now, looking back here, I was initially a little worried because we've got a total of 6 USB Type A ports. That doesn't seem like enough on a relatively high-end Z690 motherboard. But we do have dual Thunderbolt, so this is one of the few Z690 motherboards that I've seen that actually has onboard dual Thunderbolt 4. Now those are connected directly to the iGPU. They don't have an external input for an external graphics card or anything like that, but you do get to be able to use those with your iGPU if you so desire. So you got that plus your HDMI. You can run three devices off of your iGPU. That's pretty awesome. However, in the box, ASRock actually includes an extra USB 2 breakout connector. So you can run USB 2 devices for human interface devices, mouse, keyboard, whatever, and those wouldn't actually necessarily use any of your back panel USB 5 or 10 gigabit ports. That's pretty awesome stuff. Now, in addition to that USB 2.0 header that, there's a cable in the box to be able to make use of that header externally at the back of your motherboard, there's also 30-pin USB 5 gigabit headers, a USB Type-C header, and yes, that's right, there is a Type A header right on the motherboard. So we've got a 7th Type A that's right on the motherboard itself. This is kind of weird, but it's maybe pretty cool. There's a hardware feature from ASRock that will actually lock down a couple of USB ports, and that onboard Type A port is one of them. So if you want to put your critically important files on a USB flash drive or something like that and have ransomware protection so that the drive is physically isolated, you can do that with that onboard Type A. This motherboard also provides a second port for that, but it's a SATA port. So you could use a mechanical hard drive or a SATA SSD along with the USB thing there and actually physically isolate those devices as a form of ransomware protection. That's what ASRock is selling. Now, I'm gonna have to probably revisit that feature. It's an interesting feature. I'm glad that they're trying, glad that they're doing some innovation out of the box. I think I would have rather had that USB Type A port accessible at the rear of the motherboard, but hey, they're trying. They're trying some new features. Can't fault them too much for that. In terms of the PCIe layout for this motherboard, we have 3 physical X16 slots. The primary X16 slot will operate in PCI Express 5x16, or the primary and secondary slot will operate at PCI Express 5.0 by 8x8. So you can have 8 lanes in 2 different slots. The bottom slot is PCI Express by 4, and that goes through the chipset. There's also an additional PCI Express by 1. The front panel USB-C connector, that is a 2x2, so that's a 20 gigabit USB Type-C. There are 8 4-pin fan headers on this motherboard, and it has ample RGB connectivity for both 50/50 and digital RGB LED strips. This is a DDR5 motherboard, and as such, ASRock has put a lot of work into making sure that you can clock the very highest DDR5 clocks up to DDR5 6400 plus. That is an overclock, but this is surface mount steel reinforced DIMM slots, so you've got the high-end DIMM solution there. In terms of other connectors on the motherboard, we've got 6 SATA 3 ports at the front edge of the motherboard, plus the one, which is the independent SATA 3 controller, which you can use for lockdown and lockout. When you're not running a process on it, it's physically locked down, so it won't be accessible to ransomware. Then we've got 2 Hyper M.2 slots that are PCI Express Gen 4. We've got 1 M.2 PCI Express Gen 3 and 2 SATA The other M.2 is PCI Express Gen 3 by 2 and also SATA 3. So one of your M.2 ports is basically if you run out of other M.2 ports or you're running a SATA M.2. That's your non-hyper M.2. Don't use that one unless you're using it with a SATA M.2. Our 7.1 audio solution is the Realtek ALC 1220. It does have an ESS Saber 9218 DAC. That's with Nahimic audio. Our wireless LAN, that's a killer AX1675 802.11ax Wi-Fi 6E plus Bluetooth. And we've also got the movable 2.45/6 gigahertz wireless antenna. So we get the high end, the nice antenna solution right in the accessory box, which is good. Don't like those rubber duck antennas, especially not on a more premium motherboard. In terms of the physical design of this motherboard, it's an 8-layer PCB using 2 ounces of copper. There is an integrated VRM fan, so be aware of that. If you're not a fan of the VRM fans, or fans, chipset fans, and things like that in general, be aware of that. If you're not running an overclock, I couldn't even hear it kicking on. So I'm not going to say that it doesn't run, but I don't think that it does because I didn't hear it in our open air Lee & Lee test bench. It does also have a metal backplate on the back of the motherboard, which is thermally connected at the top and side for the VRM area. So the top and the side here is connected to the PCB, and as we've seen on other motherboards, the PCB can get quite hot for the VRM area, even if you have a ridiculously beefy cooling solution. I feel like ASRock is cheating a little bit in the best possible way, having a fan for their VRM. It means that you're going to be able to dump well above 240 watts in your i9 12900K should you choose to overclock it in the most extreme fashion possible. ASRock says this is a 20-phase power design, and running the 12900K on this motherboard, it got a little warm, but with our FLIR thermal imaging camera, worst case scenario, 30 minutes of burn-in testing, about 65°C, give or take. And that's with the fan so low that it was inaudible, although I did see it moving after the torture test inside with the cover on the case. So it's, basically simulating what it's going to be like inside a regular computer, not an open air test bench, which is kind of a best case scenario. As long as you got a little air movement, that's a pretty good scenario. I think on this board, I might have liked to see dual 2.5 gig NICs, or if the supply chain is the thing that's completely messing up the pricing, maybe even a 10 gig NIC. I'm really not sure about the suggested pricing for the motherboard yet, because the Newegg pricing is a little high, but talking to the folks at Micro Center, the pricing was supposed to be right in line with what previous Taichi motherboards have been, Z690 chipset, and other details like that notwithstanding. But they didn't know when they were going to get stock of anything from ASRock in the 690 series. There was literally nothing at Micro Center. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. I am planning to do a full build with this motherboard, and you can sort of preview and check that out. And yes, the gear does move. It's mechanical. They added that on the prior generation Taichi. It's a little over the top. It's a little excessive. Little excessive. But hey, that's cool. You get a nice feature. All right, in terms of BIOS, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect from ASRock for Z690. They expose pretty much all the options. You've got all the accoutrement right in the BIOS. A lot of really good features in the BIOS. I always like the way that ASRock does the BIOS. Pro tip, the Z690 launch feels a bit rushed. Pretty much everybody, the BIOS that comes on the board, especially if you got something around launch day, around the first week of November 2021, you're going to need to update the BIOS. I mean, that's probably good advice even if you're buying a board later, but the BIOS is probably way out of date. A lot of teething issues with Alder Lake, a lot of stuff going on. If you're rocking Linux, Thread Director at the time that I'm shooting this still doesn't work correctly. There's a thread for that on the Level 1 Techs forum. You can search for that and check that out. Come hang out with us and let's do some talk. It'll work. You can use the machine just fine without Thread Director. I mean, the 12900K is a 16-core monster, 12 performance cores and 12 efficiency cores. But if the Linux scheduler is doing its job, it's going to be that much more monstrous, because those 8 performance cores are really monstrous for user interactive workloads, and the other 8 cores can run background jobs really well. The Linux scheduler is not super clued in to doing that. You can do that yourself manually, but with the fixes to Thread Director and maybe a patch to the Linux kernel or something like that, should be better, but Linux support is a little weird right now on Alder Lake. If you're not into weird or teething issues, and you rock Linux 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Alder Lake maybe not the best choice. But if you're on Windows 10 or 11, and especially 11 is a better experience than 10 with Alder Lake, it's fine. They worked out all those issues. All the effort, all of the late night, midnight oil went into supporting Windows 11 on the Alder Lake platform. So there it is. It's good stuff. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. This has been a pretty quick look at the Z690 Taichi. If you have any specific questions, things you want to test, things you want to see in the BIOS, hardware support, off-label uses, the dual PCI Express 5, that might be good for a pass-through type situation. Although, until the scheduler thing gets fixed, using it as a VFIO build, probably not recommended. But hey, let's chat on the forums at Level 1. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.